Hi friends, Angelica Veneta, co-chair of Inclusive ICR. We are a coalition of over 220 employers in Eastern Iowa, all working together to grow the diversity and inclusion of our workforce, to create a space where employees feel a sense of belonging, included, and valued. Inclusive ICR is a proud sponsor of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion track of the Iowa Ideas Conference. As you participate today, be sure to connect with other Inclusive ICR champions, as we'd love to share information with you about our upcoming coalition meetings, projects, and how our work is impacting positive social change in our region. Be sure to check out our website at inclusivicr.org for upcoming events and our e-newsletter. Thank you and have a great conference.
Hello and good afternoon. My name is Sam Edsel. I am Special Projects Editor at the Cedar Rapids Gazette, and I am proud to be here moderating the Iowa Ideas panel on the Human and Social Services track, Session 3, Going Without, Relief, Recovery, and Access to Information. Here with me today are Linda Gorkow, Executive Director of the Iowa Food Bank Association, Joshua Barr, Founder and Chief Strategist of Raising the Bar and former Director of the Des Moines Civil and Human Rights Commission, Ashley Bailus, Community Outreach and Assistance Director of Linn County Community Services, and Stacy Kimberlin, Director of Consulting Services at CultureALL. Thank you and welcome, and I'm glad to have you all here, and hope we can have a wonderful discussion. Today's topic, relief, recovery, and access to information, covers quite a bit of ground. I'd like to focus on a couple of topics, including food insecurity and housing and homelessness. A phrase we often hear is that Iowa farmers feed the world. Still, according to a report released in May by the Governor's Feeding Iowans Task Force, of which Linda was a member, over 400,000 Iowans are food insecure. Food insecurity is when a person does not have access to sufficient nutritious food to meet their basic needs. And as we know that issues like food insecurity can disproportionately impact minority groups, Black, Latino, Indigenous folks, immigrants, the LGBT community, and so on. So that's a topic I would like to address. Right, and thank you so much to Inclusive ICR and to all our other sponsors for helping make this conference possible. To return to the topic of food insecurity, I'd like to start by just asking what the current state of hunger in Iowa is and how it's impacting various communities throughout the state. Linda, if you'd like to start first, please.
Sure. Thanks for having us. When we're looking at across the state of Iowa, the current food insecurity numbers, right now we're about 9.4% of Iowans are food insecure, and nearly 100,000 children alone. So when you're taking a look at the numbers, they are high, and there's some components that are in the works in the background that are affecting food insecurity, and we're watching very closely. Since the pandemic, at the height of the pandemic, it was that 400,000 number, and we were seeing double the distribution that we had prior to the pandemic. Things are in flux right now. When we talk to our food banks across the state of Iowa, one day they have a large number of people in need of food, and the next day there's no one in the line. So it's very different across the state. But right now there's a lot of flux to it. But I would tell you that the major thing is there is need for food across the state throughout the community, and food insecurity does occur in every county across the state.
And how did the pandemic impact specifically food insecurity? I know that we had talked about disruptions at food pantries and so forth.
When the pandemic occurred, we worked immediately to get into contact across the state, connecting with one another and our partner agencies, with the Homeland Security Emergency Management, along with the governmental entities, and working together, we created a variety of different areas of work for us. The Court of the Feeding Iowa's Task Force was one of those key areas that was created, but also working with the Iowa Department of Aging and our AAAs, food banks, doing a variety of different work with our partner agencies. Immediately when the pandemic occurred, we had to spin on a dime, and we hear that word pivot very often this past year and don't want to hear it anymore. So I apologize for bringing it up. But from choice pantries, which is the preferred method of distribution of food, because we want people to take food that they will eat. Everyone has a different preference and also needs in regards to food. So rather than choice pantries, we had to start boxing food. That it was at the time that the number of volunteers was very diminished. We know that volunteers come from sometimes the more elderly sector, or businesses, big businesses coming together and doing packing for backpacks and things like that. So with businesses closed down and people in their homes, we really had challenging times. And I can't believe the true heroes are the food bank and pantry people across the state of Iowa. There are 6 food banks in the state. We're all Feeding America food banks. And within that network, there's over 1,000 nonprofit pantries and feeding programs that are doing heroic work across the state and making sure that people have food. So the biggest thing is that collaboration was essential. We hear about now the food supply chain concerns. That was even a little bit worse at the beginning of the pandemic. We were very concerned. We had ordered semis and they weren't showing up when we didn't have the food to distribute to Iowans. A lot of concerns in that regard. There was less food for us to procure through the Hy-Vees and the food rescue programs we had, because people were buying all the food at the grocery stores. So it was a combination of a variety of things that really forced us to really work together and come up with some very creative ways of feeding Iowa. And one of them was, as you may have heard, and I don't know how much you've heard about the task force, but it was agricultural IDLs, Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, ISU Meat Lab, and pork producers, the Iowa Beef Cattlemen's Association. We're all working together in the Iowa Turkey Federation to get meat processed. There was not enough meat packing plants that could actually processing plants to process the meat. And so we were able to do that through the Iowa State Meat Lab. So it provided essential protein, which is across the state of Iowa for the food insecure. So a variety of different programs, like a bulk purchasing program that we did, repackaging necessities that we were not receiving. So we created our own little mini supply chains. And we talk about that we worked fast, but it really avoided some crucial problems that could have occurred. So there's a lot of heroes out there that working together, they made everything come together for the state of Iowa.
Thank you. And I know that, there are, as with so many issues, this food insecurity disproportionately impacts minority groups, immigrants, the LGBT community, Black, Latino, Indigenous folks. And I wondered if we could talk about why that might be, what those root causes are, whether it's purely an economic issue or if there are other causes as well. And I'll open that up to anyone who would like to.
Can you repeat that?
So what we know that this issue, disproportionately impacts minority groups, and I wonder if we could talk about why that is and what those root causes are.
Well, I mean, I think part of it is when you talk about hunger. I mean, the key thing everyone needs access to is food, clothes, and shelter. I mean, those are the bare necessities as the Jungle Book. Sorry, showing my age here. As they say in the Jungle Book, the bare necessities. And so when we start to talk about those that are not of European descent being more affected by those things, essentially, part of that reason relies in some of the de facto racism that still exists, and even some de jure as well, legal racism. But I think the fact of the matter is, we need to be creative. We can talk about the problems we can talk about the reasons for the problems all day, but we need to start talking about solutions. And one of the things that we need to focus on is during the course of the pandemic, we gave out money to people. And that was something that was a taboo for we can't give money, but to save the economy, that's the reason why we gave the checks. To save the economy, we gave money to people. That was the reason why we did it. To save the economy, we're giving out free vaccines, because it ain't about necessarily saving lives, because we just give free medicine for any issue to anybody. That's to save the economy. But we really need to start talking about human life and really trying to really be deep and really be creative. It's just amazing how creative we became during the pandemic. And so, for example, many states, or not many, but some, Michigan, California, a few others, when the pandemic started and people had to go home, many youth typically, some in cases, the food that they get is 2 guaranteed meals, breakfast and lunch come from school. So what they did was they gave all the students EBT cards, so they could actually still have access to food outside of the classroom, because people weren't going to class physically in the classroom, and some people still aren't. And those are creative ways to make sure that we're actually putting food on the table and taking care of people. But we don't need to only be innovative in times of a pandemic. We need to be innovative at all times, creating a safety net from which people have the ability to move up the socioeconomic ladder. And unfortunately, many of those people at the bottom rungs of the ladder are people that have my skin color, and that's because we have never really dived into the depths of really addressing some of the issues. Yes, we had the civil rights movement of the 1960s, where they allow people to now sit at the same lunch counter as other people. But what's the point of sitting at the lunch counter if I can't afford the meal? And so we have to have that deeper conversation about the economics of the country and the way the country is structured to support some who are typically doing okay, and while others who are not doing okay, you're on your own. And we have to have that deeper conversation.
I agree. Oh, go ahead, Stacy.
That's all right. I'd like to add to what Joshua has just said. So I'm going to assume, when I shouldn't assume, that we all know that it's much more expensive to be poor than it is to have means. And that comes from, like Joshua said, the way the systems are set up, that we don't address that issue. And if we look at just, home ownership, generational wealth, that is the way to create generational wealth. And so many people from minoritized communities, and I say minoritized because globally, people of European descent, people with white skin, are not the majority. So minoritized community, which also includes women. Women are not the minority in this country or in this world, yet they are oppressed in ways as well. But I say all that to say, being able to start to practice inclusive language and being inclusive in other ways, starting that journey will help us to root out some of the inequities. Joshua was talking about some of the money that came, the PPP loans, those were not equitably distributed. Again, minoritized individuals and minoritized people owned businesses we're not able to access those in the ways that the dominant culture folks were able to access. So starting that journey of being inclusive is to figure out where we are, what we think we know, and what we may be missing, particularly in a state like Iowa, where so many people are from dominant culture that are serving disadvantaged folks, to be able to have that self-awareness, because so much of what we do comes from self, right? I care, I'm helping, but it's about me more than the other, because there's a route to that understanding and that level of complexity of another human or culture that I don't understand yet, unless I have spent a lot of time and reflection in that, trying to be culturally responsive. So that was kind of all over the place, but it's really foundational, especially if we want to love our neighbors.
And that might come back to this notion of the difference between equity and equality. Would you agree?
Certainly. This country is equal, but it's not equitable. So it doesn't mean the same thing. Equality is not serving everybody in the way that they could be served.
Yeah, well, I think, just to kind of go back to, I think you can't even get to equality without equity. I think equity is the pathway to equality, and equity is giving each community what they need in order to succeed, so that characteristics which they have no control over, such as race, sex, color, skin, etc., isn't determinative of where they were going to wind up in life. And so having that discussion and really understanding it, I think if you talk about it in ways people understand, they start to get it. So I think most Iowans like American football. And so, you know, one of the things I always say is for people who do like football is, at the end of the year, who gets the first draft pick in the NFL? And that the answer is the team with the worst record.
The
The
Lions.
question is, why is that? Well, the team with the worst record gets the best pick so they can better compete. And why does competition matter? Because it makes the entire league better. Yeah. And, you know, if we're in this society, you know, another thing people have to understand is this society, this economy, this is the house that we live in. So the United States of America is a house, and we're all kinmen or kin persons, AKA brothers and sisters. And another example I always give to people is, you know, if you're a parent and one of your children is struggling in school or struggling with an emotional issue, do you tell them, figure it out, grouch, you know, figure it out for yourself. You're on your own, buddy. Like most people say, no, I'm going to help my child. That's why, because it helps the whole family. Everybody benefits when you help everybody. And I think, you know, with giving out money over the course of the pandemic, and I know there are some people that think the government gives out too much money, but when I go and do presentations and stuff, it's how many people think government spends too much money? You know, of course, a few hands always go up. And how many of y'all were eligible to get checks from the government during the pandemic? Their hands go up. How many of y'all gave the money back because you thought the government spent too much money? Every hand goes down. Nobody's giving the money back because it benefits you. It benefits the entire country. And we need to stop being selfish when it comes to other people and actually think about it from a holistic, a collective perspective. And it's not just be a better person. I never really strive to preach that. I think you do need to be a better person, but we operate in a system. We operate within an economy. And that means we operate on laws and we operate on economics. So we really have to strive to improve laws, really strive to improve economics for all persons. If children have access to food, if a lot of families are food insecure, and giving an EBT card to children improves the fact that they have access to healthy food, that affects everything. Because, you know, if you're hungry, you can't think. If you're hungry, you can't really process. You're thinking about your hunger. So we need to continue that system even during the summer. It's not just hey, well, good luck during the summer, guy. Like, no, it's like we have to continue this. I mean, here's the key thing I'll say is this, and this is what I mean by systemic. We just left Afghanistan. We were there for 20 years. 20 years. We spent $3 million a day for 20 years for the Taliban to take back the country in a week, literally in a week. That added up to $2.26 trillion, $300 million a day for 20 years. Now imagine if we actually had put that money into education, into addressing issues of poverty, $2.26 trillion, into the issues of houselessness. I mean, we'd really be well off. Now, I want to bring this closer to home because, I used to work in retail. And if I was missing $20 out the register, I'd be in trouble. I'd probably get fired. Ain't nobody fired for this. Who's getting fired for us wasting $2.26 trillion? Nobody. Nobody's claiming responsibility, but we know where to spend money, but we seem to don't know how to take care of home. And I think we have our priorities mixed up and our priorities backwards.
Isn't that also the communication of understanding each other at home, the people that we live with, and finding out what is helpful for people and what they want, because our assumptions of what people want are way off sometimes. And we can't assume, because my knowledge is only my sphere of understanding of what I've lived through, not of understanding and learning from someone else's vantage point. So just talking and trying to provide, a type of, let's say, pork to an area that's they don't eat pork, and just taking it out for a mobile pantry. That's not helpful. That's a waste. So I think the food banks and the pantries of understanding of the different types of food that people want or need or eat, that they actually do eat, but you don't know that until you talk and ask questions. And
the other thing I was going to add to that is I think oftentimes too, we develop systems and programs for those who deserve it, right? And for folks who, or what do I want to say? We create systems and programs so that way there's no fraud, even though the reality is the fraud that's happening is probably pretty small to what the entire program should be. And when we do that, we make it so hard for people to access that the people who truly need it can't get it. They can't get the access to it because it's really difficult for them. And then what we also do is oftentimes we create programs and systems that kind of help, but not really, right? Like it's not the full extent of help that people really need. And it's because we're so worried about helping people that don't deserve it. And I think that in and of itself, the question of deserving or not deserving is another really big question that I think, gets asked all the time in the development of some of these programs that really isn't necessary. The reality is that people need help. I mean, going back to those checks that Joshua was talking about that everyone went to, I know speaking from the rent assistance providers that I worked with in Linn County, that when people got those checks, the amount of requests for assistance went way down because people were using their funds the right way. I mean, the reality is that people will take care of themselves and do the right thing when they have the means. But when they don't have the means, it becomes a whole different conversation. And so I think having the conversation about how do we genuinely and truly meet people's needs and stop worrying so much about those who don't deserve it, that I think we'd have a lot better outcomes in some of these programs as well.
And that's a great point. And I'd like to kind of touch back on a term that Joshua used, which is houselessness instead of homelessness. And I think that might be an important way of talking about the issue that maybe could change our perspective a little bit about how to address housing crisis and people who lack homes. Is there a way, how are people addressing at the community level housing, Ashley, if you could kind of speak to that a little bit?
Well, how we're doing it right now versus how we should be doing it. I think, the one, I think, positive thing that has come from both the derecho locally and the pandemic is that we've started to think about things a lot differently. And a lot of the conversations I've had with folks around housing, one of the things that someone said that has always stuck with me is that we've been talking for years, even decades, that there's a housing crisis that is coming, and it is finally here, right? It is completely here. And now it is harder than ever to dig ourselves out of it because construction costs are so high. Labor is also at shortage. And so it's really hard to dig ourselves out of the crisis we now find ourselves in. And so we need to start moving forward and thinking like right now about how are we thinking long-term about fixing these housing issues that we have. It's going to take major investment in housing, and specifically as we're talking about homelessness and how we resolve that, it's housing. Like housing, affordable, truly accessible housing is how we resolve those problems. And really, that's it. But thinking about how we resolve that short term, it's really difficult because we don't have the housing stock to put everyone in. And so we need to be thinking short term and long term at the same time. How are we reducing the pressures that we're feeling and helping people at this point in time that are in severe levels of crisis? But then thinking long term about how are we adding to our housing stock, especially right now when it's that much more expensive to build new housing.
And that, can I add to that a little bit about, so the COVID relief money is going to housing shortage, trying to provide affordable housing. So we're talking about houseless people for sure, but also people that rent. And oftentimes rent is higher than a mortgage payment. There are a couple of bills in Congress right now, and one gives, I don't know how much money, 25,000 or 15,000 to first-time home buyers, right? That's really, really helpful. There's another one that gives the big chunk forgivable to first-generation home buyers. So there's your equity, right? 70-some% of white people in the United States own a home. I'm going to get the number wrong, but it's way under 50%. It might be 30% of African-American or Black people own homes. And so, you know, when you're paying that rent, it's just gone. When you're making a mortgage payment, you're developing equity in your home, different kind of equity, right? So making those things be equitable in the first place is going to help us get at the problem of the underserved and the marginalized. And we're not talking, when we're talking about giving people what they need, we're talking about giving access, removing those barriers, like Joshua talked about, like Ashley talked about, like Linda talked about. It is not a handout, but it is a hand up. It's removing the barriers, making equitable pathways to, you know, a sustainable income, home ownership, access to healthy foods, all of those things that we want for everybody. Like Joshua said, we're all in this society together, the big house.
If one of the most important and effective ways to address these issues is direct assistance, how do we overcome or change the stigma of that? I mean, how do we get from a place where that's seen as a negative thing by those who have means, and to where it's seen as an effective way to help address problems that really impact everyone? Don't jump all at once.
Yeah. Well, we all talk about the SNAP, the SNAP assistance of how important that is. I mean, all the things we're talking about, when one of these areas are an area of concern, there's usually other, it impacts one another. With increasing energy costs, how are they going to keep up their, how are we going to keep the rent up? How are we going to be able to buy food? There's a variety of things that happen. We always say sometimes, and it might be housing also, but food is a flag. That's the first thing. You got to do it 3 times a day. You got to eat, we all have to eat. But I think this with SNAP, really talking about that and removing those barriers of, there's a lot of, in Iowa, we're proud people, but I think that moving it to an EBT card has helped tremendously, but making it easier. And now the availability of ordering from Amazon, but the ease is one area, and also just educating people of what the benefits of it. We find that so many of our seniors won't sign up because they think they're taking it away from somebody else, but it's there for them. And it's a tough talk to talk about to people is reducing the stigma is huge for people.
And I think part of the stigma is a proper teaching of history, which is a big problem in this country. From the inception of this country and even prior to, when you were an indentured servant and you finished your time, they gave you a gun, they gave you corn and money, or sometimes a piece of land. When During the course of the Civil War and even up to 1988, they had something called the Homestead Act, where if you moved out west, which Iowa was part of that, and you stayed on the land for 5 years, you pay a little fee and then they give you the land, no matter how long it was. And that's honestly why the Midwest is predominantly people of European descent, because those things were given to one group, AKA people of European descent in America, and were denied to the newly freed Africans, and they were pushing off the indigenous people. So those are things that were actually happening. And even when we move up to today and really talking about the loans that came out, the PPP loans, et cetera, and how some people had to give the money back because they were catching bad, like Shake Shack. Yeah, we're a small business. Are you? Like, we've been giving out funding and assisting people forever. I mean, even with the opioid crisis, instead of incarcerating people, we actually, gave them money so they could actually, the $7.4 billion invested so they could get rehab and treatment, but the opposite during the crack movement. So we have to really talk about how things are. We've been giving out and assisting people, giving them a leg up for years. It just hasn't been all people. It's just been a certain group of people. And so, but the problem is when you try to teach proper history, all of a sudden, that's critical race theory. Wait, what is that? I've never even heard of that before. What is that? You guys are teaching racism. Is it? Like, really talking about the Homestead Act and all these other privileges? Even when we talk about minimum wage, how did minimum wage come about? It came about during the New Deal. But they said, well, let's not give it to maids. Let's not give it to railroad porters, and let's not give it to servants. And why? Because those people look like me, and we didn't want to give them minimum wage, but we gave minimum wage to the other groups. And the problem is because we don't really context U.S. history properly, how we got to where we are. There are people who think I did this all by myself. No, you didn't. Slow down. And you think my family did this all by themselves. Nah, the Homestead Act really had a big play in the shaping of how states and economies look in this country. But we don't have these hard conversations. We don't have them, and we pretend, and we live in a bubble, and we tell ourselves little lies, sweet little lies, as Fleetwood Mac would say. And that's why we can't really get over the hump, is because there are people who literally believe that, everything they got it by themselves, when that's not true. And so we have to have that deeper conversation. But here in the United States, every time that conversation comes up, there's always a blocker. You thought after George Floyd, we'd actually get somewhere and start really having a conversation on race and inequity and injustice in this country. And it turned in, that's critical race theory. You guys are racist. Like, really? Okay. So we just can't have those hard conversations. And there are people that distract us and throw up roadblocks and smoke signals, and we fall for it every time.
Bread for the World. Thank you for that, Joshua. Bread for the World. I can't get it in the chat because it's disabled. Bread for the World, racial wealth gap simulation. It's just the facts. And it takes you historically through the policies and the procedures between white people and Black people. And it just lays it out, again, very factually. It's not all inclusive, of course, but big things, laws, policies, impacts. It is very effective to help people understand privilege, because it is just laid out there for you. Again, it's Bread for the World, racial wealth gap simulation.
All right. Let's see. I don't have any questions from the audience quite yet, but
because the chat is disabled? I don't think you're.
Yeah, is there a Q&A?
I don't think they can type anything because the chat is disabled.
I think I'm supposed to be able to get something, but
I don't see a Q&A.
Yeah, I think you got it.
We're on the Zoom, and I think other people are on something called Huva. And so that they can ask questions to our moderator, to the room host, and then he'll pass things on to me. But so we've talked about education, and we've talked about direct assistance. What other ways can we address these disparities?
I personally really think, a lot of times people are, there's a great, or first I think it's a horrible saying, aim for the moon, and if you miss, at least you'll be amongst the stars. First of all, if you know astrology, or not astrology, but if you understand how space works, if you aim for the moon and you miss, you'll be back on Earth, because stars are further away. I don't know who came up with that quote, but they need to totally get rid of it. But I say that to say we have to take care of home. And, a lot of people really want to point fingers at Joe Biden and Congress, et cetera. And that's part of the issue. But most of the money that comes from the federal government trickles down to local government. That is county, that is city, that is your schools. And then they decide what to do with that money. So you really have to understand how local government works. And if you really understand that, you'll understand that a lot of the pandemic loans, our city council was figuring out what to do with that, where to put that money for food, et cetera, for rental assistance, et cetera. That went down to the local government from federal government. And when you really understand that, you understand that everyone can shape their community, because anybody can participate in local government, going to city council meetings, going to county board supervisor meetings, going to school board meetings, organizing with groups that ideologically match up with you and the things you want to address. And you can really, really push the agenda on certain things about where we're spending our money, where we're investing it, and how to have a reimagining. So let's talk specific, because I don't really like to talk abstract. One of the key things when we talk about housing access, when you can create inclusive tax credits, where persons who seek out tax credits from local government, the government said, we'll give you a tax credit, but you need to make at least 10 to 20% of the new housing in your multifamily dwelling inclusive housing, meaning that that it's affordable housing for a person. So that means you designate a certain amount of homes for affordable housing. The reason why you do that is because people should be able to live where they work. And we're in, at least where I live, we're continuing to build new apartments, pricing people out and pushing people out into the outskirts. And thing people have to understand is crime does not happen in a vacuum. Usually crime is just a symptom of a bigger issue. And that symptom is a lack of housing opportunities, or poor housing opportunities, a lack of access to food, a lack of access to taking care of persons. So we can create and push for fair chance ordinance, where fair chance ordinance says that we're not going to put on the initial application whether or not you were convicted of a crime. And what that allows persons to do is persons who are returning back into the workforce and returning back to society, they're able to really be looked at as an individual rather than with a scarlet letter of, oh, you went to prison, et cetera. We can really push for equity impact assessments, kind of figure out where are the cracks in our system, and what can we do. We can create citywide internship programs for youth, showing them different ways, because education is really about problem solving. And one of the key problems you need to solve in life is what opportunity are there going to be to put food on the table, have a roof over my head. And so you can really work to get the whole community involved in this process. And I wrote a whole article about it. I would share it if the chat wasn't disabled, but I would share that with what things you can do in your local community. I put about 57 different things you can do in your local community to help shape it, to address some of these things that we're talking about.
One thing I might add just to the general conversation is I think right now we are in a unique opportunity too, especially thinking about housing, where I think more than normal, people are acknowledging that across the board, there is a housing issue, because whether or not people themselves have experienced it, they absolutely know someone who has. And I think that traverses every race, every income level, all of it. And I think this is a really unique opportunity for us to really grab that and start having these really difficult conversations and understanding how things are playing out in our community, and understanding how it's impacting people, and what are the real solutions that help move us forward. Like, what are the solutions that people want, that it's workable for them and that they want to see, instead of trying to make it a one size fits all, because of course that doesn't work.
And just to pause real quick, Dan was able to share the link to the bread.org page, and Joshua, I just shared your article, the 50 plus action items to fight against racism, in the Hoopa chat.
Thank you.
So hopefully that's very useful to our viewers.
I would also say the local, get involved local, but also on the state level, if you ever get a chance to. It's amazing. We have a building, but it's great when you go up there to on the hill. But the hair in the back of my neck go up when I think about the people. So many of us don't have access or don't feel like we have access to it, and feel uncomfortable walking in there. And that's not the way it should be. It's exciting when new people can go there and feel, as we talk and we bring people up and to visit your legislators and to see what's a part of our state. But the biggest thing is if people can get involved on the local level and the state level, I think we need more people. We need to hear those voices also at the state level too, because there's opportunity, and if nothing else, of just not letting people turn their heads, of just continuing the talk. And like we talk about, Joshua, before, you've talked about conversations and the programs that you've done about, I love what you did with the meals, and maybe you can share about that. But those conversations, meals bring us together and we talk about all of that. But I really do think those conversations are crucial.
And I agree. I think you have to really address it from 2 points. You have to address it from a policy level, because again, we are a country of law and economics. We're a republic, as we say in the Pledge of Allegiance, not a democracy, and therefore a republic is built on rule of law. And we're a capitalist country, so we're built on economic systems. But at the same time, to really, 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 and this goes back to your question earlier, Sam, how do we break some of the stigmas, is we do have to have those conversations and get to know one another. So that's the hearts and minds piece. And that's something we strive to do. A few years back, we had a whole dialogue on, it's called Breaking Bread, Building Bridges, where we brought people together, matched them up based on their differences, based on race, sex, color, political ideology, et cetera. And they had dinner together over the course of a few months, first in public and then in each other's homes. And they were able to kind of begin to see the humanity in other people. And I think that's a big part of the stigma stuff, is that we look at the others people as the others, less deserving, are undeserving in many cases, and we don't look at them as human beings. And I think we're such a polarized nation right now. It's like everybody's just out for self, crabs in a barrel. And we really have to see the humanity in others, and how, everybody can get up if we all just work together and begin to see each other as human beings. So I agree with what Linn is talking about. And I totally understand. I think so. We have to really attack it from multiple angles. As Ashley said, there's no one way to do this. We have to attack it from multiple angles. And part of those angles is really understanding the platinum rule, which is treating your neighbor how they want to be treated rather than how you want to be treated. Because each of us, we have to, again, understanding living in a house. Everybody, people who have kids, most parents, when I'm doing these trainings, say, none of my kids are exactly alike. Even with the same two parents under the same roof, everybody's got a little different in them. And we need to acknowledge those differences. First, acknowledge the humanity, then acknowledge those differences, and really come together to really create something beautiful. Because if you talk about Maslow's hierarchy, everybody always thinks that the top of the hierarchy is self-actualization. But 3 years before Maslow died, he looked at it and recognized, I'm doing this wrong. And he recognized that beyond self-actualization was self-transcendence. And that's the ability that once you actualize, you're able to be all that you can be, you give back to the community. And that self-transcendence is the point that we need to really strive for. Everybody's striving for self-actualization, me, me, me. but they're forgetting the last principle in Maslow's hierarchy, which is self-transcendence. Utilizing my talents, my passion, the thing I've been given because I had access to food, clothes, and shelter to give back to my community. But we really, again, have to get to know people, understand that we can all collectively shape our local communities, really get out there, attend these meetings, and really transform things so ultimately everyone benefits.
And it's not a lack of caring, right? If I don't understand other people very well, it's not because I don't care about them, it's because I haven't experienced them. So I can have deep compassion and care for people. But when they're very different from me, especially if I grew up in a homogeneous environment like I did in Iowa, I haven't experienced people who are very different from me. So when I experience them, it's on a less complex level. I had a board member say to me once, "Oh, I didn't know you were that deep." So why would she know I was that deep if she didn't know me? She experienced me on a simpler level, right? And so we make meaning all the time with our brains. So we stereotype and we generalize and sometimes overgeneralize to be able to make meaning to experience. And if we don't have those experiences outside our little groups, right, our circles, then we don't understand the differences. The differences could be uncomfortable. We can make assumptions like the golden rule. I'm going to treat people the way I want to be treated. But that can be limiting because not everybody wants to be treated that way. The platinum rule, treat people the way they want to be treated. Or people have very different experiences. We feel like colorblindness is the way to be. We've sort of been trained to be colorblind, but that could negate a person's whole identity and discount their experiences because so many of us, we all have racialized identities that we did not choose. And so the way we are received in the world can be really different based on the way we look. And that goes for gender expression. And that goes for on and on and on, right? So it's the experience part. Sorry, Sam. We have to experience to be able to unpack our unintended biases, right? That unconscious stuff. We didn't put it there. It was socialized into us outside of our awareness. That's why it's implicit or unconscious. So it's unintended. To overcome it, we must experience differences in a deep way so that we can see the complexity of this other person.
Sorry, Stacy, didn't mean to try and interrupt you there. I'd like to propose a question from one of our viewers, Sophia DiMartino, Community Relations and Grants Director at Horizons, the Family Service Alliance. And Sophia asks, one of the biggest challenges of social services work is creating programs on behalf of people who are limited in the amount of time that they can contribute to planning efforts. What is the best way to gather insight and center those in need in the work of planning community services? And I'll let that.
Well, I think, and I'm not expert on all of this in this regard, but I would say conversations. I mean, that bringing people to a table that, and you have to do it through a collaboration of variety of people in a community. When you talk about, like Joshua, you talk about getting involved in your city and your community, but and finding the people that have the passion to help, and that number one, yeah, you want to do the work. You may have the funding for it, but don't have the time to do it. I think the collaborations with other nonprofits, and I think things are happening to a point where the more collaborations, the more successful things are going to happen. The more that we can share our knowledge and our information, I think is helpful. And having the support with another nonprofit too is helpful. That's what I have found, but talking and understanding.
And pay them for their time.
Mm-hmm.
Don't expect people from oppressed, marginalized communities to
Right.
be your cultural informant for free. Pay them for their expertise, pay them for their knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like what we really need is a program where every Iowan gets matched up with someone else and they go have a meal together. We do that whole breaking bread, building bridges statewide. Would you agree?
I don't think that is the answer. Because I mean, I think that's a good way to expand in your understanding. I don't think, you know, because once you hang out with one person, it's not like, oh, I understand all Indians now. No, you don't. I mean, there's different regions, different cultures in India, et cetera. You know, I lived in Colombia for a few years in earlier, about 10 years ago, 10 years ago. But I don't understand all Latinos, nor do I understand all Colombians. Every time I went to a different part of Colombia, I had to relearn Spanish essentially because the Spanish is so regional. I didn't even know that till I lived down there. So I think part of it is getting to know people. But again, once you get, you know, knowledge requires that you do something. And so the key thing I say is, yeah, you should get to know people. You should always be trying to expand your mind. You should also be reading books. You should be watching documentaries. You should be listening to certain kinds of music. We can't just Netflix and chill anymore, as the pandemic is revealing. We got to get to work. There's a lot of work. The cracks in the system have been revealed. And it doesn't look like anybody's actually trying to fill them up. They're just arguing about the cracks and whose fault it is the cracks are there. And so the thing we have to understand is they're called elected representative, not elected leaders. An elected representative means they're supposed to represent you and your concerns. And as a representative, they are just temporary hired help to get you to where you want to be. And the problem is we've make the assumptions that once a person's in power, they're just there forever, because most incumbents never lose elections until they decide to move on. And until we understand how a republic operates, and I keep saying a republic and not a democracy on purpose, so people understand that there's a difference, we're going to be kind of stuck in this rut of people pointing fingers back and forth, blood and crip. I mean, Republican, Democrat, and people really won't be able to really move on. I'm tired of pointing fingers. It's time to get to work. And I think the answer isn't just everyone have a meal together. The answer is let's have a meal together. And after that, hey, let's get up and get to work and really strive to fix the way our communities are being operated. And then, as Linda pointed out, also the state. And then just keep expanding. Martin Luther King didn't start out in Washington, D.C. He started out in Montgomery, Alabama, doing the work there. And he just grew. You got to grow from where you are and really start from where you are. Dream big, but you got to start small.
To build that community starts with one relationship at a time. It starts with that bonding. So thinking about not just your friend group, consider where you shop. Consider the media that you consume, like Joshua said, what music you listen to, all of those things to expand your experience, to expand your circle outside of the people that are most like us, because it's comfortable. Well, I immediately met this person. Oh my gosh, we're simpatico, right? So we're attracted to each other. So be willing to have a little bit of discomfort, right? Mm-hmm. To get to know people, because when we know people, we forgive those little things that might bother us, right? And we can see more things as cultural. It's not, oh, you're doing this and you're making me uncomfortable. Oh, that's just the way you were raised. So being able to sustain a little bit of that again and live in the discomfort. That's the only way to get to the other side. You got to move through the little bit of awkwardness.
I think Sophia's question is a really, sorry. I was just gonna say, I think Sophia's question is a really good one and a critically important one, is making sure that we're including people who are affected or people who really would know best about what services and programs are going to work when they're developing programs, and especially if we're talking about community-wide planning. And I'm not gonna pretend like I know the answer to it, because I don't think I do know the answer to it, but I know one of the things that I've been trying to do more recently is trying to involve some direct service workers who are working with folks on a regular basis as sort of that advocate. The other thing is really leveraging some of the more grassroots organizations, advocacy organizations that especially over the last year and a half have come to be in our communities, leveraging them and their expertise and really understanding and learning from what they're fighting for and what they're talking about, and trying to incorporate that in the process, I think is another really good way. But I think there's many ways that we need to be trying to think creatively about how we bring those folks to the tables and how we bring their ideas and their experiences and what they want to see, what their solutions are, is something that's probably going to be an ongoing learning curve of how we adequately do that when we know their time is so limited and so sparse.
We got about 5 minutes left. You'd like to make some, I don't know.
It's
any other
interesting. The Iowa Food Bank Association we run a SNAP hotline, which allows people to call the 1-800 number and helps people apply for SNAP services. And we're trying to get the word out. But the biggest thing in a recent meeting I was at is the variety of languages that we're receiving, calls on across the state of Iowa. And that, I think that was a light bulb for all of us. It's like we really have to take a look at providing information in the languages. I mean, I know it's something we all talk about, we've talked about in the past, but I was astonished at the number of languages and how often we utilize the language line on the hotline. Right now, we are applying 500 to 1,000 people a month on SNAP for SNAP benefits. Not that they all receive them, but that's the numbers that we are doing. But it just gives you an idea of, and one of the things, the reason why I brought this up also is that we found if we have an outreach worker going into a community and they find they get to know some of the people that live in that community, they spread the word once they trust the person, our outreach workers, and shares and communicates one-on-one. It's human interaction, us learning them and them, all of us learning from each other. And that we've been watching, and we notice that an outreach worker can make a big impact once they actually have a relationship or create some communication with one another, and then it expands from there. So I thought that was sort of interesting and cool. I guess it shows how we all are so human. We are just all human. And that is one thing that we have in common. And we all know what having a human day is like. And we're imperfect, but, sort of see past the bad stuff if we do something accidentally, but we have to allow a little bit of, slack in with one another, especially during these stressful times.
And to ourselves, right? Give ourselves the grace to be human.
Right. Because a lot of people doing great work. And we might be seeing a little bit of burnout, over the past couple of years. That scares me a little bit. When we talk about these great people trying to do great work, we have to continue to keep each other going. Otherwise, we have all this knowledge that we've acquired, and we have to, let's use it. Like you said, Joshua had mentioned, it's okay to have the knowledge, but you got to use it to make it real, to make an impact.
All right. Well, with that, I'd like to thank all our panelists, Linda Gorkow, Stacy Kimberlin, Ashley Bailus, Joshua Barr. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you once again to Inclusive ICR for sponsoring this panel. And thank you all to our viewers for taking the time out of your afternoon to share this conversation with us. So have a great afternoon and enjoy the rest of the conference, everyone. Thank you so much.